There is a palace floor at the bottom of the sea off the coast of Egypt, and the woman who once walked across it has never been found. Not her tomb, not her body, not a single bone. 2,000 years of searching, and the most famous queen who ever lived vanished so completely that we do not know within 30 miles where she lies. But in the murky harbor of Alexandria, divers found something that should not still exist. They swam down through water so clouded you can barely see your own hands. And there on the seabed, under a blanket of silt, were the polished marble floors of a royal residence. Columns, statues, a sphinx carved with a pharaoh's face. An entire drowned quarter of a city that once ruled the richest kingdom on earth. And it had been sitting down there in the dark for 17 centuries, while the world above forgot it was ever there. The official story is simple. An earthquake sank it. The sea took Cleopatra's palace, and that was the end. But the deeper the divers looked, and the further west along that coast the search moved, the stranger the picture became. Because the palace on the seabed is not the real mystery. The real mystery is what the palace was pointing toward, and what a team of archaeologists found buried under a temple 30 miles away at the end of a tunnel that runs straight into the sea is the reason this video exists. Today, we are going to go through exactly what was found underwater off Alexandria, who found it, and why the ruins on the seabed lead to a second discovery that the experts still cannot fully explain. Stay with me, because the part everyone knows about is not the part that should keep you up at night. Most people who think about Cleopatra picture a face, a profile on a coin, a woman on a golden barge. What they never picture is water. But almost everything that belonged to her is underwater now. The harbor she looked out over every morning is gone beneath the Mediterranean. The island where she slept is gone. The palace where she made and unmade the plans of empires is gone. And most people walk right past that fact without ever asking the obvious question. If we found the palace, why can we not find her? Let me set the scene, because the strangeness starts with the geography. Alexandria was not just any city. It was founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, and at its height, it rivaled Rome itself in wealth and size. It held the greatest library of the ancient world. It held a lighthouse so tall, it counted among the 7 wonders. And along its eastern harbor stretched the royal quarter, a private world of palaces, temples, and gardens, reserved for the ruling family, built out onto a small island called Antirrhodos. The Greek geographer Strabo, who actually stood in Alexandria a few decades after Cleopatra's death, described the island and the royal house on it in careful detail. He was not writing a legend. He was writing a report of a place he had seen with his own eyes. And then it was gone. Not slowly, not gently. For centuries, the ground beneath the harbor had been quietly sinking, the whole coastline settling inch by inch into the sea. Then, on the 21st of July, in the year 365, a massive earthquake struck the eastern Mediterranean near Crete. Ancient witnesses described the sea suddenly draining out of the harbor, ships tipping onto their sides in the mud, fish left flopping on the exposed seabed, where townspeople wandered out in confusion. And then the water came back. A wall of it. A tsunami surged into Alexandria and flung ships over the rooftops. When it was over, the royal quarter was under the Mediterranean. Records count no fewer than 23 earthquakes striking that coast between the years 320 and 1303. The harbor floor dropped by more than 20 feet. The palaces, the temples, the island itself, everything Strabo had described, slid into the sea and stayed there. And here is the first thing that should make you uncomfortable. For over 1,000 years, everyone knew Cleopatra's Alexandria was down there somewhere, and nobody could find it. The harbor was clouded, the visibility near zero, the seabed buried under thick layers of sand. Modern Alexandria grew up along the shore, a crowded, noisy city, and just off its beaches lay one of the richest archaeological sites on the planet, invisible, untouched, waiting. Divers who went in saw almost nothing. The water was a wall of brown. You could be swimming inches above a 2,000-year-old statue and never know it was there. Then, in 1992, a French underwater archaeologist named Frank Gaudio decided to do what no one had managed. He was going to map the entire lost harbor. Not guess at it, map it. Working with the Egyptian authorities, his team began years of painstaking survey work, using instruments that could see through water the human eye could not. They built up a picture of the seabed, piece by piece, and slowly, out of the murk, a drowned city began to take shape. What they found was not a scatter of rubble. It was a plan. The team charted the entire ancient harbor, 400 hectares of it, and there, exactly where Strabo said it should be, was the island of Antirrhodos. On it, Gaudio's divers uncovered the remains of a palace, a marble-floored building, roughly 90 meters by 30, sitting on the seabed under about 5 meters of water. Red granite columns lay broken across the sand. There were kilns and basins, blocks of dressed limestone, and walls, actual walls, still standing in their places. The divers reported swimming over columns and capitals lying in disorder, exactly as they had fallen when the ground gave way beneath them. Before the end of 1998, Gaudio announced that he had located the royal palace of Cleopatra, the last of the Ptolemies. For the first time in 1,700 years, someone knew precisely where it was. And that discovery raised a question that has never gone away. If you find buried history as unsettling as I do, subscribe and turn on the bell, because what the divers pulled off that seabed only makes the missing queen harder to explain. Here is where it gets strange. The palace they found was old, too old. When the team recovered wooden foundations from the site and ran them through carbon dating, the timbers came back to roughly 200 years before Cleopatra was even born. She did not build this palace. She inherited it. It had already stood for 2 centuries when she walked its halls, passed down through generation after generation of her dynasty. That tells you something about how deep this family's roots ran in that one patch of ground. They did not just live there. They accumulated there. And that becomes important later because a family that concentrates itself in one sacred place for centuries tends to want to be buried near it, not scattered. Now, let's talk about what came up from the seabed, because before we get to the tunnel, you have to understand what this royal island actually was. This was not a single building. It was a landscape of power that had simply toppled into the water intact. Near the palace, the divers found a small temple dedicated to the goddess of magic and motherhood, the deity the Ptolemies tied their queens to most closely. At its entrance stood a life-size granite statue of a shaven-headed priest, holding a jar carved with the image of Osiris, the god of the dead. And flanking that priest, a pair of granite sphinxes. One of them wore a human face. When archaeologists studied it, they recognized the features. It was Ptolemy XII, Cleopatra's father. Sit with that for a moment. A diver, hovering in near total darkness 5 meters down, brushes the silt off a stone face that has not seen light since the Roman Empire, and finds himself looking into the eyes of the last great queen's father, carved from dark granite, staring back up through the water. Gaudio himself called it almost a miracle that they found the Sphinx and the priest statue lying so close together, still in relationship to each other, still telling the same story they told when the island was above the waves. And then there was the head. Off the ancient coastline facing the island, the team recovered a colossal stone head, not life-size, enormous. The full statue it came from would have stood as tall as 5 meters, taller than a house. Archaeologists identified the young face as Caesarion, the son of Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, the boy she tried to make into a king. A giant image of her child, snapped off and drowned, lying face down in the harbor mud for 17 centuries. The divers kept bringing things up. Bronze cult statues from the temple, a gold ring, perfectly preserved because the sediment that buried it also protected it. Coins, everyday objects, great red granite columns, 60 of them, each 7 meters long, that had once formed a ceremonial gateway to the royal island, a drowned Roman shipwreck resting near the ancient docks. Piece by piece, an entire vanished world was coming back up into the light. This was the royal quarter of one of the most powerful courts in history, and it had been sitting on the seabed the whole time, complete, just out of reach, just under the surface, a few hundred yards off a beach where people had been swimming for generations. The mainstream explanation for all of this is clean and reasonable. Earthquakes and a tsunami sank a coastal palace. It happens. The Mediterranean is full of drowned harbors, and that explanation is almost certainly true as far as it goes. But notice what it leaves out. It explains the stone. It does not explain the silence. Because for all the statues and columns and coins and walls the divers recovered from Cleopatra's royal quarter, there was one thing they never found. Her. No tomb, no sarcophagus, no burial. The palace was there. The queen was not. And that absence is the second clue, and it is bigger than the first. Let me explain why the missing body is such a problem, because this is where the ancient record and the modern seabed start to disagree, in a way that matters. When Cleopatra died in the year 30 BCE, in the final collapse of her kingdom as Rome closed in, the Roman writers recorded that she was buried. They say her conqueror allowed her to be laid to rest alongside her partner, the Roman general Mark Antony, in a tomb she had prepared. So there should be a tomb. There should be a grand royal monument, the resting place of the most famous woman in the ancient world, sitting somewhere in or near Alexandria for anyone to visit. And for 2,000 years, no one has found it. Not the Romans who came after, not the medieval chroniclers, not the Napoleonic scholars, not a single modern excavation in the city itself. The most searched for grave in human history has left no trace. The standard assumption was always that her tomb went the way of her palace, that it sank into the sea with the rest of the royal quarter, lost under the harbor forever. And for a long time, that seemed like the end of it. Case closed. She is under the water somewhere, unreachable, and we will never know exactly where. Except one archaeologist refused to accept that the answer was the harbor at all, and she was looking in a completely different place. For that, we have to leave Alexandria and go west. About 30 miles along the coast, out past the edge of the ancient city, there is a temple complex called Taposiris Magna. The name itself is a clue. It translates roughly to the Great Tomb of Osiris. It was founded around 280 to 270 BCE by Ptolemy II, one of Cleopatra's own ancestors, and its main temple was dedicated to Osiris, the god of death and resurrection, and to his consort, the goddess Cleopatra, publicly identified herself with throughout her reign. In the theology of the time, the queen was treated as the living embodiment of that goddess, and Mark Antony was cast as the living Osiris. A temple to that exact divine pair, built by her own dynasty, standing outside the city, away from Roman eyes. For one archaeologist, that was not a coincidence. That was a map. Her name is Kathleen Martinez, and her story is almost as strange as the queen she is chasing. Martinez is not a lifelong Egyptologist. She trained as a criminal lawyer in the Dominican Republic, and she became so gripped by the figure of Cleopatra, so convinced that history had wronged her and misread her, that she taught herself archaeology and went to Egypt to find her tomb. She began working at Taposiris Magna in 2004. She has been digging there ever since, for 20 years, chasing a hunch that nearly everyone told her was hopeless. As she once put it, if there was even a 1% chance the last queen of Egypt was buried there, she considered it her duty to search. And here is the part that stops the skeptics mid-sentence. She kept finding things. Over the years, Martinez and her team pulled a stream of evidence out of that temple that pointed straight at Cleopatra's era. Bronze coins bearing Cleopatra's own face and name. Coins depicting Alexander the Great. Figurines of the goddess the queen worshipped. A carved head that some believe is Cleopatra herself. An entire cemetery around the temple, a necropolis, its graves oriented toward the temple as though the people buried there wanted to face something important inside it. High-status mummies with gilded amulets. Ancient Egyptians did not bury their elite around a temple for no reason. They did it to be near someone who mattered. The dead were pointing at something. Then, in 2022, the ground under Taposiris Magna gave up its biggest secret yet. And this is the reveal the whole story has been building toward. Beneath the temple, more than 40 feet down, through solid sandstone, Martinez's team discovered a tunnel. Not a small drainage channel. A tunnel roughly 2 meters tall and stretching over 1,300 meters. More than 4,300 feet of passage, carved by hand deep into the rock, running out from beneath the temple toward the sea. Its construction was so precise that engineers compared it to one of the great feats of ancient Greek engineering, a famous aqueduct tunnel on the island of Samos, celebrated for its geometric perfection. Somebody put enormous effort into cutting this passage, straight and true, through the bedrock, under a temple named for the tomb of the god of the dead. And part of the tunnel was flooded, filled with seawater, because the far end of it runs into the Mediterranean, into the same drowned coastline that swallowed Cleopatra's palace 30 miles east. The tunnel does not just sit under the temple. It heads out under the sea and disappears. Think about what that means. You have a temple dedicated to the exact gods Cleopatra and Antony claimed to embody, built by her family, standing away from the city. Under it, a monumental hand-cut tunnel driving toward the water. Around it, a cemetery of people who chose to be buried facing the temple, some of them with the trappings of royalty. And inside it, jars and ceramics dating to Cleopatra's own time. Martinez's theory is direct and unsettling. After the queen's death, she believes Cleopatra's body was carried here, away from Alexandria, away from the reach of Rome, and taken through that tunnel to be hidden somewhere the Romans would never think to look. A secret burial, deliberately placed out of sight, at a site named for the tomb of a god. And then, in 2025, the search moved into the water itself, working with the oceanographer who found the wreck of the Titanic. Martinez's team took the hunt offshore, out past the temple to where that tunnel points. And beneath the waves, they found it. A submerged port. Massive man-made structures on the seabed, a harbor that no one knew existed, a promenade running from the temple's outer wall straight down toward the Mediterranean, a landing place out at the end of the flooded route, at exactly the spot where a body carried through the tunnel would have emerged. The pieces were lining up. A temple, a tunnel, a sunken port, all arranged along a single hidden line running from the god of the dead's sanctuary out into the sea. And the official response to all of this? Caution. And that caution is its own kind of clue, because here is where the story takes on the texture of every great unsolved mystery. Not everyone accepts what Martinez believes she has found. Some scholars point out that a tunnel like this could simply be an aqueduct, a water channel, its resemblance to that famous Greek engineering feat being exactly the point. Others note something more frustrating. For all the artifacts, all the coins, all the announcements, very little of the excavation has been formally published and reviewed in the way archaeology demands. Much of what the public knows comes through documentaries, interviews, and social media rather than peer-reviewed reports. The tomb itself, the actual burial chamber, the body, has never been found. 20 years of digging, a tunnel, a port, a cemetery, and still no queen. The most important question, where Cleopatra actually lies, is exactly as open today as it was when Martinez started. Now, does any of this prove the most dramatic version of the story? That Cleopatra's intact tomb lies waiting at the end of a flooded tunnel, sealed and untouched beneath the Egyptian coast? Probably not yet. Let's be honest about that, because the truth deserves better than hype. The skeptics have real points. A tunnel can be an aqueduct. A cemetery near a temple is common in the ancient world. Coins and a queen's face on them tell you the site was active in her time, not that her body is under it. And plenty of archaeologists believe the far more likely answer is the simple one, that Cleopatra's tomb was in Alexandria after all, and that it went into the sea with the rest of the royal quarter, dissolved and scattered, gone for good. But strip away every dramatic theory, and you are left with a set of plain facts that are stranger than the fantasy. There is a real palace on the seabed off Alexandria, the actual royal quarters of the last pharaohs, complete with the sphinx of Cleopatra's father and a colossal head of her son. Recovered from the water by name, there is a real temple 30 miles west, built by her dynasty, dedicated to the exact gods she and Antony claimed to be. Under it, there is a real tunnel, over 4,000 feet of precisely cut rock running toward the sea and flooded at its end. Around it, there is a real necropolis of people who wanted to be buried facing that temple. Offshore, there is a real sunken port that no one knew about until 2025. And in the middle of all of it, there is a real hole in history, the tomb of the most famous woman who ever lived, recorded by the Romans as built and used, and never seen since. You do not need to invent anything to be unsettled by that. You just need to look at what is actually there. And if even the modest version of this is true, it changes the shape of the story we tell ourselves. It means the ancient world is not the finished, cataloged place we treat it as. It means one of the most documented figures in all of history, a woman written about by her enemies for 2,000 years, still has a final secret we have not cracked. It means her family drowned along with their capital, and that somewhere along a stretch of Egyptian coast, under the water or under the sand, there may be a chamber that has held its silence since the last days of the ancient world. And it means that every year the search gets closer, the sea gives up a little more, and the oldest cold case in civilization inches toward an answer that keeps refusing to arrive. Here is the one question that will not let go. If Cleopatra's own people went to the trouble of building a temple to the gods of the dead, cutting a tunnel 4,000 feet through solid rock, and running it out to a hidden port beneath the sea, then whatever they were protecting, they wanted it protected from someone. You do not carve a passage that long into the earth to hide nothing. You carve it to hide something or someone from a power you fear. And if that is what happened, then she is still there, still sealed, still at the end of that flooded tunnel in the dark, exactly where they left her, out of reach of the empire that hunted her and out of reach of us. So who finally found the lost world of Cleopatra? Not a treasure hunter, not a tomb robber, a French archaeologist mapping a drowned harbor foot by foot through water no one could see through, and a Dominican lawyer who taught herself to dig and spent 20 years chasing a 1% chance. Between them, they raised a palace from the seabed, uncovered the sphinx of a queen's father and the giant face of her son, cut into a tunnel under a temple named for the tomb of a god, and found a sunken port waiting at the end of it. And then they reached the edge of what the water and the rock would give up. The palace is real, and it is still down there, columns and marble floors lying in the dark off the beaches of Alexandria. The tunnel is real, and it still runs toward the sea, flooded and unfinished in its secrets. And the woman at the center of all of it is still missing. 2,000 years after she vanished, her tomb recorded and never found. Her body somewhere under the water or the sand of a coast that keeps its dead very well. It was built to last. It was built to hide something. And whatever that something is, it is still there, waiting behind the stone and the sea for someone to find a way in.